The night had a way of carrying secrets, as if the moon itself was privy to stories that the stars dared not speak aloud. And beneath its pale, silvery glow, Elara walked slowly along the winding path that led to the old lakeside pier, her hands clasped loosely in front of her, and her thoughts tangled with memories she could neither forget nor fully embrace. The lake mirrored the moon perfectly, every ripple catching fragments of light that danced like whispers on water. And it was here, beneath the infinite expanse of sky, that she felt the weight of loneliness settle against her chest in a familiar rhythm, a quiet ache that no conversation, no laughter could ever fully soothe. She had always been drawn to nights like these, nights that held a certain fragile magic, a softness that allowed her to breathe without the burden of judgment, without the expectation of words she could never quite find. It was a night much like this, she recalled with a bittersweet twinge, that first brought him into her life. Caelan, with eyes like storm clouds and a smile that seemed almost impossible in its warmth, a boy whose presence could unravel the tight coil of silence she carried around her heart and replace it with something dangerously alive. They had met by accident, or perhaps by the subtle insistence of fate, at a quiet little cafe tucked away in one of the city's forgotten corners, a place where the soft hum of music and the gentle clink of cups created a cocoon for those seeking refuge from the world outside. Elara remembered the way he had looked at her then, not with the usual curiosity or idle interest strangers offered, but with a focus that felt intimate and disarming, as if he could see past the walls she had carefully constructed and into the fragments of herself she hid even from herself. She had expected nothing from that encounter, nothing more than the fleeting warmth of company, but the weeks that followed had transformed it into a slow, steady bloom of connection, quiet and deliberate, the kind that could only emerge when two souls met without the noise of the world interfering, when two hearts chose to understand each other in their silences and half-smiles, and the brush of hands that lingered a second too long. Caelan had this rare way of speaking without words, of making her feel understood even when her voice faltered or her thoughts scattered like autumn leaves in the wind. And it was in those nights, under street lamps and passing clouds, that their relationship grew, not rushed, not forced, but measured and delicate, like the moonlight that caressed the surface of the lake tonight, flickering and trembling, beautiful yet tentative. Tonight, however, was different. Tonight, the air carried a subtle tension, a sense of something unsaid, and Elara felt it deep in her bones as she approached the pier, the wooden boards creaking softly under her weight. She paused at the edge, looking out at the water and letting her reflection blend with the stars, letting herself sink into the stillness, when she heard a soft, familiar voice behind her, one that had become both comfort and temptation in equal measure. "You always find your way here," Caelan said, stepping closer, his shadow stretching long across the moonlit planks. She turned slightly, managing a quiet smile that didn't reach the full warmth of her eyes, and said, "I like the quiet. It's easy to think." He nodded, leaning against the railing beside her without pressing, his presence calm yet electric, the kind that made her heart beat in uneven rhythms even when nothing happened, even when the conversation stayed polite and simple. For a while, they simply looked at the moon together, side by side, sharing the silence that had become their own language, a code neither needed to explain because each knew the other would understand. The night air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine and distant rain, and in it, Elara felt the memories of their past weeks rise like a tide laughing over coffee, rushing against his arm in crowded hallways, sharing secrets in whispers, the slow realization that what they felt was more than friendship, more than fleeting attraction. Yet there was also fear, a subtle shadow that neither had voiced. Because the closer they grew, the more terrifying the idea of losing each other became. The more fragile their connection felt under the weight of their own insecurities. Caelan finally broke the silence, his voice barely more than a whisper, as if the night itself demanded reverence. Do you ever wonder if moments like this last forever? Elara's lips parted, but no words came. She shook her head, unsure how to articulate the depth of what she felt. The way his presence both grounded her and set her heart adrift. He smiled softly, understanding without needing her explanation, and reached for her hand, fingers brushing against hers in a tentative caress that spoke more than sentences ever could. In that single touch, she felt the world narrow to this moment: the moonlight, the quiet water, the soft rustle of leaves, and she realized that some things were meant to be understood without speech, that love could be whispered beneath the sky and felt in the spaces between heartbeats rather than declared aloud. They stayed there for what felt like hours, neither wanting to move, neither willing to break the fragile spell that held them, suspended above ordinary time. And in that delicate suspension, Elara understood that life had a way of giving exactly what you needed at precisely the moment you didn't expect it. That even amid uncertainties, love could root itself quietly, without demand or proclamation, simply growing, waiting to be acknowledged. Yet beneath the peace, a subtle tension lingered, the unspoken questions of the future, of what it meant to feel so strongly for someone in a world that was often cruel and indifferent, of whether the threads connecting them were strong enough to withstand storms that had not yet arrived. Caelan, sensing the thoughts behind her eyes, squeezed her hand gently, his gaze fixed on hers, and whispered again, "Whatever comes, we face it together. That's the only truth I need right now." Her chest tightened with a mixture of relief and longing, and she finally let herself rest her head against his shoulder, inhaling the faint scent of his cologne, mingled with the freshness of the night air. And in that closeness, she felt a quiet courage she hadn't known she possessed, the courage to trust, to hope, to let herself love without reservation. The moon climbed higher, spilling silver across the lake, and each ripple became a reflection of moments they had shared, each one a reminder that life's beauty was often found in simple, intimate instances, the kind that could be stolen from time if you paid attention, the kind that would echo in memory long after the stars themselves had faded. They spoke little after that, letting silence fill the spaces where words would have been inadequate. And yet each sigh, each glance, each careful touch was louder than any declaration, richer than any promise, because it came from a place untainted by fear, a place where the heart spoke freely even when lips refused. Hours passed, though neither measured them, and when a cool mist began to rise from the water, caressing their skin with gentle insistence, Elara and Caelan slowly moved together, walking back along the pier with hands entwined, their steps synchronized in quiet harmony, the soft creak of wood beneath them punctuating a night that seemed both fleeting and eternal, a night where whispers beneath the moonlit sky became vows without words, a language of trust and longing that needed no translation, a promise that neither wanted to end. As she returned to her small apartment with the lingering scent of lake, water, and moonlight clinging to her clothes, Elara felt a profound sense of clarity. A realization that some connections, once formed, could withstand uncertainty and distance, that trust could be spoken in gestures as much as in words, that love, in its purest form, needed only to be felt, held, and honored. And as the city lights dimmed and the hum of night wrapped around the buildings, She looked out her window toward the place where the lake met the horizon, imagining Caelan standing there still, gazing at the same moon, and she smiled softly, a smile full of hope and tenderness, knowing that beneath that same sky, their hearts continued to whisper to each other, quiet yet unwavering, certain yet gentle. And that some nights, some moments, were so profound that they would live in memory and in soul long after time had passed, a testament to the enduring power of love found not in words, but in the shared silence beneath the moonlit sky. The days that followed carried the quiet magic of that night, a kind of unspoken tether between Elara and Caelan that neither could explain. Yet both felt in the subtle shifts of their routine, in the lingering glances across crowded rooms, in the way a shared smile could light the dimmest corner of their hearts. And as autumn deepened, painting the city in shades of amber and bronze, their friendship began to stretch delicately into something more, something undefined but profoundly consuming, a careful dance where every word, every touch, every glance mattered infinitely, and yet they moved slowly, aware that the most powerful connections were those nurtured patiently, like a fragile bloom waiting for the right sun. Caelan, in his quiet strength, became a constant presence in her life, though never imposing, never demanding. He walked beside her in silence when words would have been heavy. He laughed softly at the small ironies she pointed out. He held her hand lightly when she faltered and let her pull away just as easily, allowing her to retain the freedom she cherished, without ever letting her feel unprotected. And in this balance, Elara discovered a love that felt safe yet thrilling, tender yet alive, a love that whispered in small gestures rather than grand declarations, that grew in shared sunsets, in long walks through empty streets, in conversations where half the meaning was left unsaid and perfectly understood. She found herself thinking of him constantly, the way his eyes seemed to hold quiet storms, the curve of his smile that hinted at secrets he rarely shared, the subtle warmth in his presence that made her pulse quicken, even when he was just nearby, and she realized, slowly, that what she felt for him was not fleeting admiration or casual affection, but something deep and rooted, a tether to the soul that defied easy explanation and resisted words, because some feelings were too vast for sentences and too fragile for hurried utterance. And yet, within her heart, there was a trembling fear, a hesitation born not of doubt in him, but of doubt in herself, of whether she could allow herself to surrender to something so consuming, something that had the power to heal her, yet also the power to shatter her, if mishandled, because love, she knew, was never without risk. And the more she felt it, the more vulnerable she became. Caelan, perceptive as always, seemed to sense the currents of her hesitation, and he never pressed, never rushed. Instead, he offered gentle affirmation in quiet ways, an extra hand on a difficult day, a carefully timed message that said more than a paragraph of words, a small sketch in her notebook with a single line, "I'm here," written as if to remind her that even in silence, love could exist without conditions. Slowly, imperceptibly at first, Elara began to relax, to let herself trust that this bond, fragile and luminous as it was, could withstand the uncertainties of life, that their connection had its own rhythm and pace, dictated not by impatience or expectation, but by the steady cadence of understanding, empathy, and mutual respect, the kind of intimacy that grew stronger in small, almost imperceptible increments, like the slow unfurling of a flower beneath the steady warmth of the sun. The city moved around them in its ceaseless rhythm, but when they were together, time seemed to bend, stretching moments of quiet companionship into hours that felt like lifetimes, where a shared glance could carry centuries of emotion. where a touch could speak of longing, reassurance, and belonging simultaneously, and where every silence was a sentence in the book of their love, each pause more meaningful than any shouted confession. As the nights grew longer and the chill of early winter crept softly into the city, bringing with it the scent of frost and the quiet promise of renewal, Elara found herself thinking about Caelan more often, each thought a quiet pulse of longing and anticipation that refused to be ignored, and the memory of their hands intertwined beneath the moonlit sky haunted her during idle moments, in the quiet of her apartment, in the corners of cafes where she had once sat alone, reminding her that the heart had a memory of its own, one that clung to intimacy like a gentle echo, refusing to fade. Caelan, too, carried the memory of that night with him, a soft, persistent warmth that followed him through workdays and crowded streets, coloring his thoughts and filling his chest with a mixture of hope and fear. Because while he had never been more certain of a feeling in his life, he also understood that love this deep, love this fragile, was vulnerable to the unpredictable tides of circumstance and life's relentless rhythm. They spent afternoons wandering through snow-dusted parks, laughter spilling in muted bursts as the world moved around them in hurried indifference. Yet all that mattered was the space they carved for themselves, the silent understanding that each shared glance, each fleeting touch, each small smile, was a vow in its own right, a promise that neither had to speak aloud because their hearts had already written it into the fabric of every moment they had together. Yet even in this warmth, subtle doubts crept into Elara's mind. Gentle shadows that whispered questions she dared not voice. Could something this delicate survive the intrusion of reality? Could love so patient withstand the sudden shocks of misfortune, distance, misunderstanding? She carried these fears silently, trusting Caelan's presence more than words, yet wondering, in the quiet hours before sleep, if love always demanded more than patience. If it demanded courage, sacrifice, or a surrender she wasn't yet ready to give. Caelan sensed these hesitations in her, not as an accusation or complaint, but as a ripple in the otherwise smooth rhythm of their bond. And he responded with the quiet care that had defined him from the beginning, a steady reassurance that held her without pressing, that spoke through his touch, his careful attention. The soft security of being entirely present for her, a presence that allowed her to lean into love without fear of breaking, a presence that built trust in the spaces between words. One evening, after a particularly long day of work, Elara returned to their familiar pier, seeking solace beneath the moon, only to find Caelan waiting there with a quiet patience that both comforted and unnerved her. He had anticipated her arrival, as he always seemed to, and when she reached him, she felt the weight of unspoken words pressing against her chest, a mixture of frustration, fatigue, and longing that demanded release. Without speaking, they stood side by side, listening to the gentle ripple of water against the wooden planks, the air thick with the scent of damp earth and the faint perfume of his jacket, mingling with the evening breeze. Finally, after several long minutes, Caelan spoke softly, his voice measured but filled with concern. Elara, I know something's troubling you. I can feel it, even when you tried to hide it. Talk to me. She shook her head, a fragile smile on her lips, refusing to voice the fears that had been quietly gnawing at her heart. Because the words felt inadequate to express the surge of emotion rising within her, the thrill and fear, the longing and certainty, the deep knowledge that she had never encountered a soul that understood her so completely. Yet silence, she soon realized, was no longer an ally. It was a weight she could no longer carry alone. Taking a deep breath, she allowed herself to release the tension she had held so carefully, sharing in whispered phrases the pressure she had felt, the fatigue, the fear of losing the connection they had worked so hard to build, the anxiety that even a small misstep might distance them. Caelan listened, never interrupting, his gaze soft, unwavering, a presence that angered her even as the flood of confession left her, exposed and trembling. When she finally paused, exhausted by vulnerability, he reached out, holding her hands firmly but gently, as though to reassure her that no revelation could alter the constancy of his feelings. "Elara," he said, his voice carrying the quiet authority of certainty. "We've faced this before, in our own ways. We've learned to trust silence, to speak without words, to hold each other in moments when life feels heavy. We can face this too. I'm not going anywhere." In that declaration, so understated yet so powerful, Elara felt the tension begin to lift, a warm relief filling the hollow spaces that had formed in her chest. And she realized that love, while fragile and demanding, could also be a sanctuary when nurtured with care and understanding. The following days became a delicate dance of healing and reaffirmation, where small gestures replaced long speeches, where trust was rebuilt not through arguments or explanations, but through presence, through attention, through quiet acts that reminded each other that they were not alone. Caelan began leaving notes tucked in the pockets of her coat, small drawings of the lake at night, the moon reflected on still water, and little reminders that no matter the turbulence of daily life, the connection they shared beneath the moonlit sky remained unshakable. Elara responded in kind, sketching in return, leaving drawings of their intertwined hands, moments of laughter frozen in ink, subtle expressions of gratitude and love that spoke more eloquently than words ever could. And as spring slowly awakened the city, painting the trees in shades of green and spilling sunlight across the sidewalks, their bond transformed, strengthened by the storms they had quietly weathered together, proving that love nurtured with patience and understanding could survive the pressures of life and emerge more resilient, more profound, more enduring than either had imagined. One night, standing together at the pier as the first stars of the season appeared, Caelan turned to Elara, his hand brushing against hers with a tender insistence that made her heart stir, and said softly, "I want to make a promise to you, not a grand one, not loud, but a promise that will carry us through everything. No matter what comes, I will be here. I will be steady. I will walk beside you, beneath the sun, beneath the stars, beneath every sky we share." Tears pricked Elara's eyes, not from sadness but from the profound beauty of a love that spoke not in words, but in unwavering presence, in the subtle, unspoken understanding of two souls aligned. And she knew in that moment that all the fears, all the uncertainties, all the moments of hesitation had led them here, to a place where love was no longer fragile but strong, not forced but natural, not spoken but deeply felt. And beneath the luminous glow of the moon, their hands entwined, their hearts beating in quiet harmony, they understood the unassailable truth that love, when nurtured with patience, empathy, and presence, could transcend fear, survive doubt, and flourish in the quietest, most profound ways, a strength that neither had realized they were capable of until they had encountered it together. Nights like this became sacred rituals, where they would walk along the pier, hands clasped, hearts attuned, letting their silence speak volumes as the moon reflected their unspoken truths, teaching them that vulnerability was not weakness but courage, that intimacy was not measured by words but by attention and care, and that love, at its purest, was a partnership between souls willing to navigate the unknown together, leaning into both joy and uncertainty with open hearts and unwavering trust. And as spring fully arrived, painting the city in fresh shades of green and gold, the air carrying the soft warmth of possibility. Elara realized that the months of slow-burning connection, of careful attentiveness and quiet patience, had culminated in something rare and enduring, a love that did not demand perfection but embraced it, did not need grand gestures to validate it, but thrived in the silent moments, the subtle touches, the whispered glances beneath the moonlit sky. On one particularly serene evening, they returned to the pier, their favorite place, where the moon reflected on the water like scattered silver, and Caelan turned to her, eyes glinting with quiet certainty, hands finding hers as he asked, "Elara, will you build a life with me? Not just today, not just tonight, but everything we share, all the days, the laughter, the challenges, the dreams." Her chest tightened, a rush of emotion overwhelming every hesitation she had carried, and she nodded, voice trembling, whispering, "Yes, yes, Caelan." A soft smile illuminated his face as he drew her close in an embrace that spoke of protection, devotion, and the profound joy of shared destiny. A hug that seemed to stitch past, present, and future into a seamless, comforting whole. They lingered there for hours, letting the moonlight and gentle ripples of water carry them into a space where time could not intrude, where love needed no words, only presence, patience, and understanding. In the nights that followed, as seasons changed and the world moved on around them, Elara and Caelan built a life rooted in this quiet, enduring love, a life of shared laughter, whispered secrets, gentle reassurance, and unwavering support, understanding that the truest love does not shout, does not demand, but whispers, sustains, and thrives beneath every sky they share, beneath every moon, forever. And beneath that eternal, moonlit sky, their hearts continued to whisper, always, a language of love unbroken, unshakable, and infinite.